What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the long-term review of the 2018 Triumph Street Triple RS. Yes, I'm in the middle of the road under a bridge because it is hot as hell in Georgia, but I've had this bike for around 5 to 6 months, and Triumph let me borrow this bike. This is not my bike. But I've been riding it a good bit. I've put about 3,000 miles on the bike, or 3,000 or 4,000, something like that. But I've had it for, half a year now. So I figured I can make a long-term review for you guys because, I do my first rides. If you guys aren't familiar, I have a first ride series where I ride bikes for the first time. And I've done a first ride on this bike. You can click the little link up there at the top of the screen to check that out. But what we're talking about today is, now that I've ridden with it for a while, what do I think about it? So before I get asked to leave by safe security, one thing I want to touch on real quick is looks. I don't really have much to say about looks because obviously the looks haven't changed since I've gotten the bike. It's kind of personal preference. I really like the way the bike looks. Other than the tail, I wish the tail didn't bubble out quite as much. But other than that, man, I really love the bike. I love the engine color. It's got this like kind of dark gunmetal. I love the way it looks. A lot of people don't like the insect eyes, but that's whatever. But nobody's interested in that. Everybody wants to know what's it like owning the bike for like 6 months. So yeah, the bike's got 4,200 miles on it. That is how many we have put on this beast. So you guys that are probably looked into this bike, you know about this screen. It's phenomenal. I absolutely love it. You can see that we're in a dark area right now. It's got the kind of low contrast screen that looks really good at night. We're gonna ride into the daylight, you can't really see it, and it changes to white. That is just one example of super attention to detail that Triumph is putting in their motorcycles, and it's phenomenal. The screen is just a whole nother level of awesome for a motorcycle. I'm kind of a techie guy, so I really appreciate cool little stuff like that. But first things first, let's talk about this engine because it is phenomenal. I have grown to massively love this engine over the time that I've had the motorcycle and gotten the pleasure to ride around on it. Now, when I did the first ride of this bike, I said that the engine, you had to work a little for the power instead of what a normal naked bike. A normal naked bike, you've got the power anywhere you want, low down. This bike, you do have to work a little bit for that power. It is not directly at the bottom. It kicks on quick, but when you're comparing that to something like, I don't know, like the Speed Triple, the larger engine version or brother of this bike, you got a lot of power down low, and you don't have as much on this, obviously. As you can see, the wheel didn't start coming up instantly, which is what would happen on something like a wow traffic. When I was giving it some gas and I was giving it a good bit of throttle, the wheel didn't really start coming up till 6,000 or 7,000 RPMs. And that's a few RPMs higher than you would kind of expect out of a naked bike, because naked bikes are kind of known for having really low end torque. And this bike has a ton of torque, especially with that triple engine, but the power's up a little higher, and I actually like that because it makes me feel like this bike is some odd hybrid between a sport bike and a naked bike. And I come from sport bikes, so I have ended up really enjoying the power band and it being a little higher. In my first ride, I said something like, I expected the power to kick in a little earlier, and that's true. I came in with those expectations, but you spend some time with it, and this engine, you really realize what a beautiful engine Triumph has put in this thing. So we're on the highway, so let's talk about one of the probably main negatives of a naked bike, and that's wind resistance. The wind resistance is what it is. It's not great. You have a lot of wind on you, but over the months that I've had this thing, I have gone to the mountains countless times, and I have to travel about an hour and a half to get to the mountains, and it is all highway, and it's never really bothered me. I've never wished on the way to the mountains on this thing, it's like, dang, I wish I had a sport bike to be riding right now. I never wished that. It was always totally fine. You know, you ride on the highway for a while, you expect there to be some wind. The wind doesn't even really get bad till you're at like probably 85, 90, and you shouldn't be riding that fast because it's illegal. The one thing, if I'm going to be, you know, picky and all, I would say the one thing I would like to see on this bike is something I saw on the FZ10, and that's cruise control. Now, I know a lot of riders are probably like, cruise control, that's what you want on a motorcycle, but in this bike, I feel like it's very tech oriented. We got this cool screen, we've got a user interface for the screen that's super easy to navigate. I've never had an easier user interface for a motorcycle, and it just feels like a cruise control would fit in well. You know, we need one button right here, boom, activate it, I'm chilling on the highway. If I was being picky, that's something I would like. This is also one of the more expensive middle level naked bikes, so you know, when you're paying a lot for something, you kind of have these like hired or raised expectations. And that's something I would like to see if I could add something to the bike. Now, from the riding around that I've been doing, you guys can tell I live in a city, like a bigger city. So one thing that I wanted to touch on is city riding. It has been an absolute dream to ride around in the city. And part of that is the engine, because this bike has a crazy amount of power, but like I was saying earlier, it doesn't kick in until a little bit higher up. So you don't have this really jerky in-town riding unless you want to. You know, if you want to have a really jerky experience and just haul ass, you can totally do that. You just got to keep your revs slightly higher, and it ends up being very easy to go from stoplight to stoplight because of that entry area you have in the rev range before all the power kicks in. So if I want to ride around town super smooth, I don't even have to be in rain mode, which the bike has all types of modes, but I can be in whatever mode I want, and it's still controllable and like a pleasure to ride around town. The body position's a little more aggressive than I expected when I first got on it, but I do like it. What I found, how I tend to ride, is I have two positions. Either I'm all the way up on the tank and I'm very upright, it's kind of just a chill body position, or this seat I feel is like a little longer. So what I found myself doing when I'm headed to the mountains, or I know I'm going to be riding, you know, riding for a while, I'll scoot back to the back of the seat, and it puts me in an aggressive body position and leads me forward a little bit more. I definitely do this when I'm in the mountains and I'm trying to like really get into it and ride the bike hard. It puts me in a much better position to be able to handle going back and forth on the bike, as opposed to in city riding. Again, this is me sitting at the back of the seat. You know, you can probably see from the front GoPro, I'm very up and I'm aggressive. But if I'm just kind of cruising around the city and it's a lot of stop and go, which a lot of times it typically is. All right, so this is aggressive. This is the back of the seat. This is the front of the seat. Back straight up, super comfortable, easy access to the ground. I always find myself jumping to either of those body positions, and it's really cool to have a bike with a long enough seat to be able to, I guess I would call it, transition your body positions depending on how you want to ride. Speaking of body positions and how you want to ride, I've taken this thing to the mountains many times. For my riding style, this bike and the engine and the, you know, having the ability to sit back and get into the bike if you want to, has been one of the most ideal bikes I've ever had in the mountains. The rev range is absolutely fantastic for how I like to ride in the mountains. You know, I want to be low down when I just want to have a chill ride, and I can put it in rain mode. But if I want to be really aggressive and I want to have a, you know, if I'm on a technical road, I'm with my buddies and we're all riding hard and I have a tracksuit on, you know, I'm going to sit back. I'm going to put this thing in race mode and I'm going to really be able to get into it, you know. And the bike has done phenomenal in both aspects. So brakes, let's talk about brakes for a second. It is a Street Triple RS. It's their Mac Daddy model. We've got Olin suspension with Brembo brakes. The thing can stop, and it can stop very well, very quickly. You know, you get used to the brakes. I have found that the bike doesn't engine brake quite as much as I would personally like it to. The slipper assisted clutch definitely does help when I'm downshifting and, you know, rev matching to slow down, because that's how I typically like to slow down. But whenever you get a handful of brakes, trust me, you can stop with the quickness without a doubt. Another nice thing to accompany the Brembos with this bike is ABS, because like I said, when you want to stop with this thing and you get a handful of brakes, it easily has the power to lock your wheels up. I'm very careful with my brakes, obviously, as you should be, but if you're not, the bike's got your back with some ABS. I've never had an issue where the ABS was intrusive on my riding. There's only been a couple times where I've slammed on the rear brake just playing around, and you can feel the ABS kick in. It just feels like plates grinding. It's a terrible feeling on the bike, but that's the only time I've ever really used ABS on this bike, and not really used it, just seen what it does. Never had it engage itself. Maybe a couple times when it was raining and, you know, I was braking a little harder than I should be. Otherwise, the electronic rider aids have been absolutely fantastic. I guess speaking of the electronic rider aids, it also has traction control, and here's one thing I've noticed with this bike. You know, over time you get comfortable with a bike and you start wanting to wheelie it and stuff like that, and I've gotten the bike up a little bit, but I will say that traction control on this bike makes it very interesting to wheelie. Normally, wheeling is like, give it enough power, drop the clutch, and the front wheel will come up. But with this bike, and what the hell is that? God, that car distracted the hell out of me. So, wheeling on this bike is a very interesting balance game, because you can't give it too much power, because you'll engage the traction control, because you'll break the rear tire out and it'll start spinning. The traction control will stop that spinning. If you don't give it enough power, the wheel's not going to come up. So wheeling is definitely interesting. You could turn all the aids off, but with this not being my bike, I've got to be a little more careful with it. So I've never turned all the aids off. That would help you out a little bit in the wheelie department. Another kind of downside of this bike is the mirrors, and not that they don't work. I think the mirrors actually work fantastic at lower speeds, but when you're on the highway, or, you know, the occasional time where you're gunning it, because it happens on this bike, when that's happening, the mirrors start to shake terribly, to the point that it's very hard a lot of the times when the mirrors are shaking to tell what's behind you. And yes, I'm trying to be subtle and say that when I'm gunning it and I want to check for a cop, it's kind of hard to tell because the bike and the mirrors are shaking so much. If they didn't shake so much, I would be able to see all of the cops behind me and find out how fast I can actually go. One thing I do like about the bike is the mirrors are already at the bar end. Obviously, they don't have a lot of space up front to put the mirrors, but I have found them very adjustable up and down, all around. I personally like putting my helmet on here, and I've noticed that that does adjust the mirrors, so it gets a little annoying when I put my helmet on there and then it like messes the mirrors up just a little bit, and I'm like, damn it, I have to, you know, readjust, which isn't a problem. You can see that they're adjusted really easily. And I've taken these mirrors on and off when I've traveled with the bike, and the screws have maintained that friction enough. I've never had them come loose or anything like that. So I mentioned earlier that this bike has modes in it. From riding the bike for a while, I'll be honest, I use rain mode, you know, when I want to ride more chill and don't want to ride very quickly. I went up to the mountains the other day, actually, and it was just, trees were down, there was gravel all over the road. It was terrible riding conditions, but I put the bike in rain mode because that puts the traction control and the ABS at maximum. And I was really worried about sliding out up there. So that was a condition where I used rain mode. Worked out fantastic. I don't find myself in the track mode, which is basically everything turned off. I don't use that mode very often. I do use whatever the level 3 mode is. I think it's road. I find myself using that or rain mode most of the time. There's also 5 total modes. So there's rider, which is you adjust everything, track, race, road, and rain, or something like that. I don't know if that's the exact ones, but that's very close. So I basically use level 3, level 1. Those are my 2 modes that I use most of the time. The only times I ever used the other modes was when I was just kind of testing it out to see. I didn't really see a point. Like, if I was going to ride hard, I would want it in the harder mode with a little bit of rider aids, and I either didn't want to ride hard, you know, and that's when I would put it in rain mode. So modes are a little overkill. There's a little too many of them, but I mean, more options is better. Changing modes is stupidly simple, so it can't really, there's not much to complain about when it comes to the modes department. So I'm not really sure what the technical term for this is, but what I want to describe or talk about is the amount of time you can ride the bike straight before your butt starts hurting. Maybe something like ass half-life or something. So based on me riding this bike and everything, I've never had my legs cramp up, but after I've been riding the bike straight for about 6 hours, I noticed that my butt starts kind of maybe numb is a better word to describe it. You know, 6 hours is a long time riding. We're talking all the way up to the mountains, riding around, and part of the way back. At that point, I'm kind of like, man, my butt's starting to get tired. Doesn't want to be sitting down a lot. Normally when that happens, I'll just stop for gas and I'll stop a little longer, stand up a little bit, and that typically solves the problem. What I personally notice is with a lot of naked bikes, that becomes the issue. Like with a super sport, your back starts hurting because you're bent over in that position for a while. But on a naked bike in a supermoto, most of the time you're upright, so it's your butt that starts hurting. Luckily, I would much rather my butt hurt for a little while, be able to stand up, alleviate that problem, and then get back to riding afterwards. Here's a rather unique issue, but you know, I'm sure a ton of people will watch this video, so I don't know who's gonna watch it, but so one thing that I've had an issue with this bike is GoPro placement. I know that is a hardcore hashtag motovlogger problem, but you know, you never know. I have found that this spot where the GoPro is right now, fantastic spot, really centered on, gets me and gets kind of what's going on behind me. I've got my helmet cam, but other than that, there's not a lot of placement up here in front of me to set a GoPro. I know a lot of you guys like riding around recording yourself, and a lot of people like recording themselves from the outside, and I've tried this GoPro mount over here on the left and on this side of the fairing, and it shakes a lot. I haven't had really good luck other than this little middle spot, which has worked out really well, and it solves my issue, but there's just not a lot of options for where you want to place your GoPro up there. So as far as throttle response, as in when I twist my wrist, how the power comes on, that's been absolutely phenomenal. It has fit my riding style very well. I don't feel like there's any bullshit going on between this and what I'm feeling from the engine. I've ridden bikes where you have an issue where, you know, you give it throttle and it kind of feels like a computer's like, it seems as if the rider would like this much throttle. Let us change the throttle output to this. I don't really have that with this bike. I don't know if it's a ride-by-wire or a wall, that kind of shit, but the throttle response I have found is pretty solid. Something interesting this bike has is little grips on the inside, like little perforated grips. I don't know if you guys can see them, but I have found myself grabbing onto them with my thumb and my index finger very often. So it's tiny little shit like that, man, that I don't see in bikes as much as I do in Triumph bikes when I ride them. It's these tiny little details that you really get appreciative of. Oh, quick note, the bike does have a quick shifter. You guys can see the gear indicator on the top right. I'm not touching it, I'm not blipping it or anything, it just shifts up. I have found that to be phenomenal. My brain doesn't really understand it because I end up regularly shifting, which is not a problem for the bike, but I'm not taking full advantage of it as I need to. So I wish I really had a good road to take you guys to kind of explain the weight of the bike and the flickability, I like to call it. As far as weight and not moving, the bike is a little heavy, like not moving it around. So if you're moving it around a showroom or your garage, if you're me, if you're maneuvering it around, it's a little heavy. It's a little like if it gets going to the side, it gets a little like pain in the ass to move around. But the second you start riding, man, mixed with either body position, either the one where you're up front and you're on top of the bike, or the one where you're pushed back and you're aggressive, either way, you have a ton of control of this bike the second you start moving. To be honest, my time with this bike, every time I'm doing technical riding, I always find myself pushing a little harder than I initially tell my brain I'm going to. And I think the reason for that is this bike, it's so light on the road. You feel like you're in such control. The way the power is built and the way the engine delivers that power is in a very controllable manner. So it ends up with me feeling like I can do more than I expect to. My gosh, this road is terrible. So yeah, you know, I'm up in the mountains and I'm like, I'm just gonna kind of, I'll go at a medium pace. And then I start going and I'm like, but it's so easy to go at this pace. You end up picking up speed and all this kind of stuff, and you take what should have been a medium ride and you make it like a really technical run up the mountain, you know. And that's not a bad thing. The bike's just really easy to ride, and you know, the bike's really expensive. It should be like that. It's not a cheaper bike. If you're gonna look into the naked bikes, you are gonna pay more for a street triple, and specifically the RS model. It's one of those bikes where it's like, it's more expensive, yeah, but is it worth it? If I was gonna buy it, 100%, this is probably, I'm trying to think of another naked bike that I've ridden that I've enjoyed more than I have this bike. And granted, I've ridden a lot of naked bikes, but they've all been first rides. I haven't, you know, long-term ridden them yet, but I can say without a doubt, this is the best naked bike that I've ever ridden. It's got 99.5% of what I want in a bike. It's got phenomenal power. It gives you the power in an awesome manner. It's just a really good bike, man. It's a solid freaking motorcycle, at least from my experience riding this thing around in the city, in the mountains, on the highway for about 6 months. Guys, I think that's all I've got for the 2018 Triumph Street Triple RS long-term review. Hopefully this told you what you were looking for about the bike, man. If you're into the naked bike scene and that's kind of the bike that fits your riding style and where you're going to ride and how you like to ride, you know, you would be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't at least go try to find one of these, sit on it, and kind of, if you can do a test ride, that would be phenomenal. I would highly recommend you finding a Triumph dealer around you and getting on a Street Triple RS. Getting to ride this for an extended period of time is really going to help you understand what a high-performing naked motorcycle can feel like. And a lot of you sport bike guys, I really recommend you at least try them, because man, as far as the everyday bike that has the most use, these things shit on sport bikes so bad. Guys, before I get out of here, I do want to say thanks to the guys over at Triumph. Those guys trust me to just give me motorcycles, to let me ride around with them for a while, and without them letting me do that, I would not be able to give you guys a long-term review. You know, first ride can only tell you so much, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this long-term review. I've been Chaseontwowheels. I appreciate you watching the videos. Make sure to hit the like button if you found this video helpful or interesting or entertaining. I'll see you guys on the next one. That'll be on a Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday, like all of my videos. You guys go there and ride positive, and I'll see you on the next one. Later. We're gonna turn here quickly. This isn't a one-way, is it? It can't be, because there's a red light. Okay, because that'd be awkward. I'm gonna miss this bike. This has been probably one of the best riding bikes I've ever got the opportunity to ride for an extended period of time, man. You will be missed, Street Triple. You will be missed.